DreamWorks is a studio that I hold dear to my heart. They not only made my favorite movie of all time, Shrek, but they also made some of my favorite animated movies of all time. But recently, they've been getting the short end of the stick when it comes to major animation studios, often being looked over because of their very simplistic stories and very safe animation, and that has put a negative dent on their creative image, which results in less and less relevance on the big screen. Two of their animated films aren't getting a theatrical release and instead being dumped straight onto streaming. Why is that? Why is Universal treating DreamWorks like a lesser studio and not allowing them to make an impact in the cinematic landscape like their other studio Illumination? Well, today we're going to talk about how Universal is killing DreamWorks. So when Universal bought DreamWorks, there was a bit of skepticism on my part but also a lot of hope, since Universal was making some solid animated movies and Sing and the Grinch, as well as Chris Meldandry bringing back Shrek. And it seemed like Universal had a much better idea of what to do with the studio, unlike 20th Century Fox, since the studio heads seemed to know how to run a studio properly. However, I started to lose my optimism when I saw How to Train Your Dragon 3. It was by far the most disappointing sequel of that year. Besides that one, of course, it was not that interesting. It was very dull, and besides the scene where Ruffnut is annoying Grimble lacked any of the fun or charm that the first two had, and even though there was a good majority of people that liked it, there were others that felt ripped off by the conclusion of the trilogy, and I can definitely see why. It didn't get any better with forgettable films like Abominable to absolutely abysmal films like Trolls World Tour. There were a couple of gems like The Croods: A New Age and Spirit Untamed. Yeah, I fucking like those movies. What of it? I didn't see Boss Baby 2, but it was probably a pretty shitty movie just like the first. Then there was 2022, which saw the release of two of DreamWorks' most successful movies in a long time, The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. When I saw the trailers for The Bad Guys, I was hyped. I was like, yeah, DreamWorks is back, no more babysitter kitty shit. And then I saw the movie, and it was very bad, and not in the good way. DreamWorks is usually very good at these sort of stories, taking an underdog character that's perceived as a monster and making incredible coming-of-age movies. This is a very DreamWorks type of story. It reminded me so much of Megamind, and this story should be so easy to make compelling and interesting. But instead we get a very messy, rushed and sometimes forced mess of a movie. And while I could talk about why this movie fails to be a great DreamWorks movie, I'll save that for another video. But luckily for DreamWorks' sake, it did turn out to be profitable, as it made over $200 million at the box office and got strong reactions from both critics and audiences. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Now this is a true DreamWorks movie. I like the first Puss in Boots movie, but it's not as good as I thought it was back in 2011, but the sequel more than improved on the first one. Just by looking at it you can tell, and it had a very deep and compelling story, as well as memorable characters and phenomenal execution. I could talk about why it's so good, but literally everyone has. Trust me, if you want proof of that, just look at how many videos there are dedicated to this movie. And again, just like Bad Guys, it was massively successful, making over $400 million at the box office. But unlike The Bad Guys, the critics and audiences were right, as both sides massively loved and adored this movie. This was a true return to form for DreamWorks, or at least it seemed like it was, until Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken came out. Now I haven't seen this movie, but then again WHO has. Except for those few that creepily simp over Ruby. Ugh. But all that aside, the movie was not successful in the slightest, as it bombed big time at the box office, and only lasted in theaters for 2 weeks before getting pulled and shoved onto Peacock. And nobody really liked it except again for those few. But still, DreamWorks was in a bad spot, and it seemed like they had lost any momentum that Puss in Boots gave them. Trolls Band Together was a solid success, and even I liked the movie. Yeah, I said it, but still it didn't seem to be the success that would put DreamWorks back on the radar as a major player in the animation industry like they were back in the 2000 single quotas. And Universal kinda sees it that way, as Orion in the Dark, based on the book of the same, was quickly dismissed and dumped onto Netflix, not even getting a consideration for a theatrical release, as well as Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate coming out in March and getting dumped onto Peacock. And I know that is mostly a pilot for the show Megamind Rules, but it's still reminiscent of the very issue at hand here. So at this point you may ask, why am I pointing the finger at Universal and saying that it's because of them DreamWorks is losing relevancy? Well, a few reasons. first and most notably, the people in charge overseeing all the work at DreamWorks, and IT was a huge problem at 20th Century Fox as well. Every studio has an approach to how they release their movies to the public, and Universal has a certain approach to how they handle their movies. Usually make more of what makes money and disregard something that is new that has a few risks but could pay off. I don't think the people that Universal has in charge of supervising really understand how to run DreamWorks properly. DreamWorks is a very different studio compared to Illumination. WHO makes very safe movies that are both fun and very entertaining. DreamWorks is a studio founded on grand stories, deep thought-provoking narratives, and incredibly imaginative and compelling worlds that are both visually immersive and incredibly creative. And when you have people in charge that don't have that passion or drive, and are only concerned about making DreamWorks just another profitable brand for Universal and another quick transaction for the company, it really affects your credibility as a studio and the quality of your product. And that leads into my next point. The way that the movies are being made. When you have the wrong people overseeing your work, it's not going to come out great. And just like at 20th Century Fox, the people at Universal giving the writers creative orders and telling them what tone their movies should have to benefit their wallets as opposed to IT benefiting the story and quality. IT heavily affects how your movies will turn out as well as how the general public will receive those movies. And in my opinion, most of their movies in recent years have been like undercooked cakes inside with a nice-looking exterior. They have very well-made animation and solid premises but are ultimately poorly executed and not fully realized, and that is detrimental to DreamWorks' identity as a studio and as a brand. And the final point I want to make as to why I think Universal is killing DreamWorks, the mentality of putting money over the quality of the stories and characters. From what I said earlier, how they dump originals like Orion and The Dark onto Netflix and prioritize sequels and spin-offs, only giving them a theatrical release, and ultimately caring about revenue and not the movies themselves. And I know The Wild Robot and Boo are original movies, but I'm sure they were only chosen to be mad purely because of financial gain and not because they thought they would make great movies. Now I haven't seen them yet, so I don't know if they were going to be good or not. But the way that Universal is running this studio is not giving me much hope. I understand that the studio's main goal when making a movie is to make money, but audiences aren't going to shell out the money to go see movies that don't deliver or satisfy in quality or execution, and that's why Universal's mentality of money over quality is damaging to DreamWorks and has ultimately led to failure. And if Universal keeps taking this approach to DreamWorks, it very easily lead to the death of DreamWorks and all of its amazing IPs. Now before you say I'm over-exaggerating, take a look at what happened to Blue Sky. While some could argue IT was shut down because of COVID or because IT was simply extra baggage that 20th Century Studios didn't need to keep around. Let me ask you this. Would Disney have shut IT down if IT had any value or any viability as a studio? If IT did, the sensible thing to do would have been to sell IT off, maybe to another retailer that wanted to get in the movie industry like T-Mobile or Verizon. But they didn't do that. They shut IT down without even giving IT a second thought, and the reason why that is because IT had proven that IT had no worth as a brand in the eyes of the public, evident by how most of their underperformed or straight up bombed, and whatever they did keep of IT were the only IPs that were proven to be successful. Disney was not going to get anything for IT, so they shut IT down, and the same thing could very easily happen to DreamWorks if the movies keep disappointing both the audience and the stockholders both critically and financially. And if the studio doesn't prove to be profitable or viable for Universal, then we might just see the death of one of the greatest animation studios of all time. But anyways guys, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. And please don't let my studio die by not subscribing. Please hit that button as well as like the video. Ciao.